I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist,
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
and this is When East
Meets West.
Election Stress Disorder. So, this is not a disorder by the DSM or the
No.
American Psychiatric or Psychological Association, but Nikki Rubin, hey, what's up?
Ooh, yeah, I think most people listening are probably thinking, yeah, I think I got that because let's
Everyone feels like they have it.
everyone feels yeah, and let me just say for all our listeners, Pete and I are recording this the day before the election here in the United States. So this episode will be released the day after the election. So
Hopefully.
hopefully. And so the reason we wanted to talk about this is because we're really thinking about this what are you calling it? The post or
The
election
election
stress?
stress disorder. It will be
Uh,
post-election stress disorder by the time this airs,
yeah,
but
yeah, right,
election
right.
stress disorder,
Right. So
which,
whatever.
by the
Oh,
way,
go ahead.
like, so you're
Yeah.
saying it like we all have it. And even I talk about my one brother a lot on here, but the other brother who I don't talk as much about because he's perfect, uh, but like he is not, he's one of those not involved in politics,
Uh-huh,
but
uh-huh.
still feels it, and still
Yeah.
describes how like he can feel the tension that's going on in this 2020 election in particular.
Yeah. Yeah, because I had a patient the other day say, I thought this was such a great word. It's like the static going on in the
Yeah.
background. And
Oh my
obviously
God, totally.
today and, going forward, it's going to be really turned up. And, I think one thing, Pete, you and I were talking about before is how do we talk about the really difficult stuff that's going on without freaking people out, right? Like, right? Like, how do we, because I
Why?
know
So
that
give me a stat about that might freak people out related to gun sales.
well, yeah. Well, there was one that I mentioned to you earlier in the day where I said, I read a statistic in the paper yesterday that was saying that gun sales have skyrocketed,
Yeah.
right? So, like I can
But
say
isn't that
as a
patriotic?
I mean,
This is
we
not a
would,
political
yeah, yeah.
podcast
Well, we'll have to do it. Maybe we'll do another episode about
on
that in the future.
patriotism.
But
Have we done one on
yeah,
patriotism?
no, we haven't. But I think that would be a good one. But I can say like even saying that out loud, like I feel my body starting to react,
Yeah.
right?
The
Like,
tension.
yeah, the tension. Well,
Yeah.
and just not even tension, like more than that. I would say like my heart rate is increasing a little bit, right? And
Yeah.
so I think
Good
what
old mind body connection.
oh, ooh, it's like, so how do we walk this line between having our eyes open, right? And taking in the information that we
Yeah.
need to pay attention to and simultaneously not become sort of like lost in the fray, I guess, you
Well,
know?
the validation is what is the was key, and
Mhm.
then normalizing it. But when we're normalizing it, we're saying this is something that we are all feeling. So
Yes.
the American Psychological Association had a study just recently because of this 2020
Mhm, mhm.
election, and 68% of Americans feel some kind of that the election has a significant stress on their life.
Mhm.
And I don't know comparative to other elections, but my guess is that's higher because I think while we
I
may
would.
have been affected by other elections, this election in particular at 68%, and actually it didn't matter about your party that you were in either. 76% of Democrats, 67% of Republicans, and 64% of independents
Mm.
reported that this election is a significant stress in their life.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all, right?
No.
Because and we talked about this a bit in our polarization dialectics episode, right? That whatever you believe,
Yeah.
right? Whatever you hope is going to happen, everyone is really attached to that right
Yeah.
now, right? And so the idea that things are going to turn out a way that you don't want them to isn't just, I think in years past maybe we would have felt more the idea of like being disappointed. This
Like you're
this feels
losing.
like you're losing, but this is like, I think probably, most folks that you would ask really view this election as um,
Hmm.
perilous. I think that's the
Well,
word that comes to mind.
and another data point from that study found that, and they did compare 2016 to 20, that
Mhm.
Black adults
Mhm.
in 2016 reported 46% reported that this was a significant stress in their life, whereas 71% in 2020. And so
Wow.
I think that that's part of this is that whether we're white, you and I are
Mhm.
white,
Yes. Uh-huh.
and so maybe we're not responding like the Black voter is,
Right.
and that's also part of this tension is that there are real palpable racial tensions in today's world compared to 2006, well, 2000, no, 2008.
2000, okay.
We talked about
I was like,
race.
what,
Wait,
what
what's?
election are you talking? Like, I'll tell you the year, but just tell me who you're talking about, and
I know.
I'll
Well,
identify what you said.
2008, when our first
Okay,
black president,
yes, okay,
we were
2008.
talking about race, but it wasn't as pertinent as it is today.
Right.
That's an
No, well,
interesting. I don't know. What do you make of that? That's interesting.
I think that's because, Barack Obama had to walk a very delicate line, right?
Yeah,
Like it was, and there, that makes sense because
that's so true.
it was, the first time
Yeah,
there was any black candidate that had a real chance,
sure.
right? And, I think he was being mindful of how can I move this election forward while,
Yeah,
I don't know, like not, this is what's obviously very distressing. It's like without like rocking the boat too much. And
yeah.
I think
Without being too
now,
black.
right. And so now, I mean, the boat has been rocked, and
Yeah.
obviously, in the black community, obviously the message we've been hearing as white individuals is this is what we've been saying, right? This
Well,
is
and
what
I
we've
know,
been.
when I say too black, I'm saying that that's part of the assimilation,
Yeah.
and that's the
Hmm.
systemic racism that
Yes,
people of
exactly.
color have had to endure. And it's something like in sport, I work on a lot with athletes about finding their voice, which sometimes
Hmm.
in a system they don't have one,
Hmm.
especially student athletes, because they're just told where to be and how to be and how to behave
Hmm.
and how to feel. And
Hmm.
so maybe that's, as you were describing Barack, that's what I was thinking about.
Hmm.
And so in 2008, that was different because it was like it wasn't it wasn't bringing about the racial injustices or the systemic issues. In fact, it had the opposite Obama
Yeah,
effect where
like
people are
yeah,
like, "Oh, America's great
right.
because they have a black
Well,
president."
right, it like pushed them underground,
It
right? It
pushed them
pushed it
underground.
underground. And so
Yeah,
Trump has brought what's always been there to like a
right.
roaring head,
I
right?
always say
So
that's a little bit of a silver lining of him
yeah,
and the polarization.
totally. Because I mean, I say to people a lot, my just people in my life that are not psychologists, like
Yeah,
they'll, I mean, often ask me questions about this stuff because they want to know the
because you
psychology of
have the
it.
answers.
Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, yeah, and I'm always like, all right, guys, like I don't have the answers, but I
Yeah,
can speak to the psychological perspective.
yeah,
And I'll say, in treatment, we always talk a lot about like when people come to see us, it's like you can't target things that are below the surface, right?
right.
Like the like symptoms, for example, have to rise to the surface, and you know these are certainly like very, very painful, old symptoms. And,
Yeah,
the Trump presidency has, you know, like I said, brought them roaring to the surface. But I think then the other side of that is, right, that as that's come to the surface, people that are uncomfortable with those truths, right,
hmm
and those
hmm
facts uh, have also gotten very loud.
yeah.
And I think that's where if we kind of bring it back to the post-elections stress
Stress
syndrome,
disorder. Yeah,
just whatever we're calling it here, right? That's what feels so scary is
yeah.
that both sides or both perspectives are equally,
Well, because I
um,
think we're all feeling stress, we're all feeling anxiety,
yeah,
we're all having GI issues, we're all feeling our hearts raising. I
yeah,
think that these are the
yeah,
common symptoms we would see
yeah,
related to,
exactly.
chronic stress. I
Difficulty
don't,
sleeping, right?
difficulty sleeping,
Yeah,
changes in your appetite.
yep.
I think it is, it even decreases immune system, which we know, which
Hmm.
now put that in touch with a
With COVID,
pandemic.
right? Yeah, yeah, everything's turned.
This is
Well, so
wonder. That's why you see all these memes like 2020 is great.
right. Well, and so, coming back to what I was saying like a couple minutes ago. So maybe what we can do now is talk a little bit more concretely about how to navigate this because as we, as we're talking, I'm sure people are listening going
I
like,
can't breathe.
yeah, thank you, Nikki and Nikki and Pete. Nothing you're saying is helping me.
Yeah.
So, you said a couple moments ago like the normalizing the validation. So maybe we could kind of like walk
Yeah.
step by step about what to do with, you know,
So we're
what's
doing
in the air right now.
we're doing some support groups for athletes, and so, but specifically, like we'll do one on just general coping, one on stress management, one on mindfulness. So those are
Hmm.
general tools that can help us navigate these uncharted territories on, you
Hmm.
know. Because I think that they are uncharted territories. Yes, we've all been at polarized elections. Yes, we've
Hmm.
been where the Supreme Court has had to make decisions. Because the other big piece here is there's uncertainty, and while this is
Hmm.
election week, it's highly unlikely that by the time this airs, we'll know who the next president is.
Right. In fact,
It's
we're being told pretty concretely, like that's
we're being told not
almost impossible. That's not
right,
that's not gonna happen.
right. So so it's always uncertain, and so now it's really uncertain.
Yeah, because we don't have anything to make an educated guess about,
Right.
that it's uncertainty, as we've talked about before. We talked about it in the podcast episode, uncertainty, which, I can share has been a very popular episode. We can tell from downloads as of late,
Yeah.
which makes sense. Uh, we never know what's going to happen on the other side of this moment, right? Like
Never.
that's a very like basic
Yeah.
fact that we teach people from a mindfulness based perspective, right? We
All
don't know.
roads lead
Yeah.
to mindfulness.
All roads lead to mindfulness.
Hmm.
So we never know, though oftentimes we can make educated guesses based on probability data, right? Like
Right.
if you were to, sometimes I say to patients like the example of like if you were going to go to Seattle, which I've actually full disclosure, never been to Seattle.
Really?
Yeah, I know, it's not weird. I know
And
I'd
you're
like to
like
go.
not that far from there.
I know, but I don't know anybody in Seattle, so that's anyway. So, but but from what I know about Seattle, I can say if I was going to go there in January, right,
Right.
based on all of the data for I don't know how long they've been doing forecasts for the last 100 years of weather data, I can make an educated guess. It's probably going to be raining in January, right? It doesn't guarantee it, right? Like I
Right.
could
Right.
show up in January and it could be beautiful 80 degrees or something like that. Though, based on the information we have, I can make a pretty educated guess that the probability is high it's raining. What's happening
Right.
right now with the election, we don't have any comparable data. Like in elections past,
None.
right? We could have, based on the history of elections, we could make an educated guess that the elections would go off without a hitch, right? Maybe you are,
We need our like historians and producers to look up
oh,
1918
yeah.
whenever the election was
Yeah.
around there because also that's what I'm thinking. There may have been one other election around a
Oh,
pandemic.
well, yeah. Well, I always go back to think like elections. I mean, I always go back to the Civil War. Like that's what I, you know,
Right.
times when our country was extremely divided. But I mean, but in modern history,
Is that really
no,
any
no.
different
I
than
mean,
now?
but we don't have
No.
anything to say like, well, it's probably going to be raining. We don't have any information to make an
Yeah.
educated
Yeah.
guess on. So it
Well,
amplifies that.
I think we do
In
though.
what
I
way?
think, and that's part of the fake, this fatalistic
Mhm. Mhm.
catastrophizing cognitive distortion where places are already boarding up.
Mm.
So there is probable data that there's going to be some looting, rioting, or violence.
Well, that I don't think we can say because the reason is we this
But I'm saying the data is that people are boarding up. But
oh
go
yeah,
ahead.
fair. The date that is happening right now, but I'm saying in terms of like
Right.
making an educated guess about what's going to happen, like that's what people are doing with the
Right.
boarding up is based on fear, right? Which makes
Right.
sense. I'm not invalidating it. It's like that makes sense. But in
Sure.
terms,
No, that's a good
like we
point.
don't
That's a really good
actually
point. Yeah.
know. And so that's and again, this was really hard. The more uncertain we are about something, the more anxious we become. So
That's right.
going back to again what you were saying about what you're doing with the student athletes, right? With stress management and
Yeah.
mindfulness, I'd love to just sort of walk folks through some steps they can do because
Yeah.
even when we're saying validating and normalizing, maybe we can even be more concrete if they haven't listened to episodes in the past, like
So
of
be
how to do
concrete.
that. Well, I was going to ask you. I was actually going to ask you, Pete. How might somebody validate themselves about what's going on, and like why is validation
Well,
helpful?
so in mindfulness or like in Eastern world, we use compassion.
Mm-hmm.
So finding compassion for yourself, that it's okay that we feel uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay that we feel scared.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay that I'm boarding up my store in
Mm-hmm.
downtown, insert city name.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of validation. I think just accepting and allowing the emotions to come there.
Yes.
So acknowledging that emotions are like beach
Waves.
balls in a pool
Oh,
or
I was gonna
waves.
say
Right?
waves. Yeah.
Well, waves, they come in and they come out.
Go. Yeah. Uh huh.
Yep. Or beach balls where I could push them away because I could maybe have an extra glass of wine tonight or eat an extra Oreo.
Mm-hmm.
But they're still going to be there. And that uncertainty, that unknowing, um, well, what we're trying to do is really unknow, right? Like unlearn some of these processes and just try and find some peace in the unknowing, which is what we do in Eastern tradition. So like in Buddhism, we study impermanence. That's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
wave idea that none of this will be
Yes.
forever. And so even though this feels awful, it won't be forever.
Right. That the intensity will crest and
Yeah.
pass. Even and I think that the thing to throw in there is that and then there might be another waves.
Well, there will be
So
another wave. There
you
will
know
be another
there
wave.
will yeah there will well exactly thank you
Yes.
there will be another wave
Yeah.
and so yeah okay so this allowing this accepting of what we're feeling and when you said finding peace and we talk about this in the calm episode it's really important to clarify that peace doesn't mean not experiencing discomfort like we
That's
talk
right.
about in that episode there's often sort of confusion that peace equals relaxation
Or
it's
elimination.
or elimination and it's like it doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't actually mean that finding peace I actually really connect with the word still like stillness, like that it
Sure.
connects to some stillness. So like the eye in the center of a storm,
That's right.
right? Like how can we be still or soften the edges
Yeah.
while we're in the midst of this discomfort,
Well, that's
which
yeah.
is hard to practice,
It's so hard to practice, and I keep thinking that about all these memes about 2020, because
Mhm.
2021 is just going to be 2021. It's not like we're going to turn
Mhm.
the corner. And how many times have we heard like this year sucked? Like I can't wait to get past it. So I think in Eastern, like in Buddhism, what we try and do is just
Mhm.
be with what is. Which again,
Yes.
I'm with all y'all out there that have that funny meme about 2020, and I chuckle
Mhm.
at them all. And uh,
Right.
you know, I have no guarantees about 2021.
Well, and to be clear, what you because what you're saying is really important. That what Pete's saying doesn't mean that that unknown is something bad. And that's
Right.
I think that is the hardest thing for people to practice, right? That the way we're wired, and this goes back to old evolutionary stuff like 40,000 years ago, we are programmed to interpret uncertainty as danger, right? That is something they've demonstrated in studies, right? Like
Yep.
we know this is a part of our brain. So when Pete says, I don't know what 2021 is going to be about or what's going to happen, be mindful of the tendency of the brain to go, oh, oh no, it's going to be another 2020. It's going to be even worse. It's like, no, the only information we have is we don't know. Can we just be with this moment here? And what comes to mind, I don't know if you ever use this saying, Pete, but I use it a lot with people and I find it very comforting myself.
Hmm.
Mindfulness saying, of course,
Hmm.
is that infinite moments are too many moments to tolerate. It's
Love
just
it.
this moment. This moment is hard enough. So
Yeah.
it's like, let's just be in this moment, right?
Yeah.
This is really hard.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I mean
Is that one that is that one
yeah.
that you kind of use with people or that idea that
I,
concept of
I
just
mean, I've
like
heard
not
it. Yeah.
not piling on all the infinite we don't
I love.
know, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I was also thinking like, may all beings be free from suffering, and so we
Mhm.
have all different ways that whatever mantra someone or prayer that
Mhm.
you have or any kind of connection you have,
Mhm.
in we call them permanence anika, which is
Mhm.
another just terminology
Mhm.
anitya in Sanskrit, I think it is, and so like those they're just things or words just to recognize that this impermanence, this suffering, will will end at some point.
Right, it will pass. Yeah.
It will pass. Yeah. So I know that what we've also thinking about this in terms of fairness. So I think if we think about look at me going back to behaviorism, that that's usually your role. Hey,
Yeah,
switch
yeah,
roles.
yeah. Hey, mixing it up.
So I thinking about because I think about perspective taking. So I talked about cognitive distortion of catastrophizing, which
Mhm.
we're all going to do within this, whether we win or
Yes.
lose, and that's how
That's
people are seeing an election in
mhm.
general.
Mhm.
But also think about fairness, because within fairness, we often think about if we win or lose, or what's fair
Yep,
or not.
is that fair or not fair? Yeah, uh-huh.
Right. So think about
Yep.
perspective taking. So I was wondering what you thought about the role of unfairness in people's reactions, this coming week.
Well, I think that people wanna go in recognizing that attaching to whether it's fair or not is actually not gonna help us get through whatever's about to happen,
Right.
right? Like, there's something in, I believe it comes out of the social psychology research, right, which is the just world
Oh
hypothesis,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and what that means is that people believe that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, and, there's always justice, and,
Yeah.
hopefully a lot of people listening have been able to recognize like sadly that's not true,
Right.
right? That the we all experience difficult things and unfortunately there awful things happen to very good people and
That's right.
what might be seen as wonderful things happen to not so great people.
But I feel like
So
that's part of parenting, because I don't know, like I feel like my parent, like you try and make kids feel safe. And I feel like today's parents are different, where they're a little bit more open, because I mean, I don't know, if I was parenting, I would not. You hit the nail on the head. It's the just world hypothesis. Uh,
yeah,
and think about how archaic that is, though. Like, and
I
what are
think
we doing if we're teaching it?
well, honestly, it's funny when you say archaic, I chuckle because I'm thinking, yeah, like archaic of like 40,000 years
Yeah,
archaic. It's like, it's just like, it just goes back to like wiring, right? It's
yeah,
just like simple processing. Like it's judgments, right?
yeah,
Like good, bad, right, wrong. And, Pete and I were talking earlier today because I was saying, of course, I want to mention in a much more light and innocuous way. My beloved Dodgers won the World Series last week, which
yes, that's right.
yes,
Happy for you.
which yes, thank you. I I cried, of course, when that happened.
Um,
And so to me, in that moment, I kind of was like a little attached to like fairness and justice, where I'm like,
yeah,
it's been 32 years, like, it's been 3 times the World Series the past 4 years. 2017, the Astros cheated. Like, this is just, this is fair. And, in the moment, like, that feels good for me to like hold on to that. Though I paused and did some perspective taking
good
and
for
thought
you.
about, thank you, that, if I was, a Rays fan, a Tampa Bay fan, I'm not going to view that outcome as fair or just, right? Like,
Right.
they took out that, if anybody listening watched the series or followed it, like, they took out this really great pitcher, Snell, and, people were questioning the coach's decision to do that. And, that's going to be looked at as unfair.
Right.
So attaching to like, is this just, is this fair, is this is un you know this is unfair, this is unjust, that's normative in terms of human urges and
Yeah.
behaviors, and that's not going to help us move through, again, whatever's to come. What's going to
Yeah.
help us move through whatever's to come is what Pete's been talking about, which is allowing it, right? Like, letting
Allowing
ourselves
it,
feel
radical
the anxiety,
acceptance of
radical
it.
acceptance of it, right?
Yeah.
And that gives us then space to decide what to do next,
Yeah.
right? Like, because we don't, again, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to be effective. I don't,
We don't even know if this is going to air by the time that we think it's going to air.
Well, hopefully. I mean,
Yeah.
hopefully,
But I mean, again, that's some more,
again,
yeah,
totally,
right.
yes, yeah,
We have everything planned out. We
right,
had some technical difficulties earlier, we're doing it
yeah,
again. So these are all things that you have to just roll with. You have to be flexible. It kind of comes
hmm,
back to the,
yes,
so what I'm learning as we keep doing this is like a lot of this, like the different episodes will start to intertwine much more, and you start
hmm,
to really see how we grow within behaviorism, that one thing builds upon the next.
hmm,
And it might sound invalidating to some people. It certainly is easier said than done. I mean,
sure.
we all would hope to get out of the quicksand, a lot quicker than we all
Then
get
we're
stuck
able
in
to,
it. Yeah.
right? Well, and so if those listening, maybe clicked on this episode hoping like, oh, Nikki and Peter are going to have the answers, like they're going to tell me
Yeah.
how to feel better in this time. you know I'm sorry if that's not what you're getting out of it. What I hope people will take away from it is that maybe they can go into this next difficult period with more willingness to make space for what's hard, and see that that's actually going to keep us clearer and more grounded, being that eye in the center of the storm.
The eye in the center of the storm is perfect. And, election stress disorder, or as you're listening to this, post-election stress disorder, thank you. And we have a couple takeaways here, and be with it. We'll get through this. See you next time. This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Pete Economo.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin. Be present, be brave.
This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.